Young Guns turned a pack of unknowns into stars in 1988, and nearly 40 years later, four of them are already gone. One died, steps from the school that trained her. Another asked to be killed off. Here is what happened to every young gun. Number 1. He carried one of the most famous names in Hollywood and quietly chose not to use it. Emilio Estevez kept his father Martin Sheen's real Spanish surname, while his younger brother took the stage name that filled the tabloids, and for years that decision cost him roles that went to men with easier names. Estevez played William H. Bonney, the grinning, trigger-quick Billy the Kid who held this whole ragged gang together. Fame had found him early through the Brat Pack, the young ensemble of the Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, and he seemed uneasy with it almost from the start. Before Young Guns, he had been engaged to Demi Moore, and in 1992 he married the singer Paula Abdul, a marriage that ended 2 years later without public bitterness. Earlier, with the model Carrie Sally, he had 2 children, Taylor and Paloma, whom he raised far from the cameras. Rather than chase leading roles into middle age, Estevez turned to writing and directing, making personal films like Bobby, about the night Robert Kennedy was shot, and The Way, which he filmed with his father walking a pilgrimage road across Spain. A whole other generation knows him only as the coach from the Mighty Ducks. He became a grandfather in 2019. At 63, he is doing the thing almost no one from this cast expected, climbing back into Billy the Kid's boots to direct and star in a third Young Guns film in New Mexico. Billy the Kid was the outlaw who never lived to grow old. Emilio Estevez grew into the rare star who decided that lasting quietly meant more than burning bright. Number 2. By the time the sequel came around, he wanted out so badly that he asked the writers to kill his own character. Kiefer Sutherland agreed to return only if Doc Scurlock died in the Stinking Springs shootout, and screenwriter John Fusco rewrote the scene to let him go. Sutherland played Doc, the soft-spoken outlaw who wrote poetry and quoted scripture between gunfights. The son of actor Donald Sutherland, he had already made his mark in The Lost Boys and Stand By Me, and he was only 20 when he married Camelia Cath, then 34. Their daughter Sarah arrived in 1988, the same year Young Guns opened, and she grew up to act on Veep. That first marriage ended in 1990, and the next year he was engaged to his Flatliners co-star Julia Roberts, with the wedding called off just days before the date. A long stretch of hard living followed, including a short jail stay after a drunk driving arrest that he chose to own in public rather than bury. Redemption, when it came, was enormous. In 2001, he took the role of Jack Bauer on 24, a part that ran 9 seasons, won him an Emmy, and finally made him bigger than his famous father ever was. Beyond acting, he built a second life as a touring country rock musician, releasing his own albums and playing small clubs for the pure love of it. At 58, he still works constantly, and he has spoken plainly about how becoming a father so young kept him from far darker mistakes. Doc Scurlock rode away from the gang hoping to start a gentler life. Kiefer Sutherland spent decades doing the very same thing in real time, one hard-won year after another. Number 3. The hardest blow of his life did not arrive on a battlefield or a film set. It came in 1998, when his son Cody died of melanoma at 42, and the grief shadowed everything that followed. Jack Palance, who played the cold cattle baron Lawrence Murphy, the man whose greed sets this entire range war in motion, spent his final years raising money for melanoma research in his son's name. He had been born Volodymyr Palaniuk to a Ukrainian coal mining family in Pennsylvania, and he went down into the anthracite mines himself as a young man before boxing professionally and then flying missions in the Second World War. The rugged, reshaped face that made him one of Hollywood's great villains came in part from that hard beginning. For decades, the studios cast him only as the heavy, the gunman, the brute, earning him early Oscar nominations for Sudden Fear and the classic Western Sheen. Vindication took 40 years. In 1992, the Comedy City Slickers handed him a warm, funny role and with it, an Academy Award. And at the ceremony, 73 years old, he dropped to the stage and performed one-armed push-ups, turning a lifetime of being underestimated into a single unforgettable minute. Away from the screen, he ran a cattle ranch and painted, far gentler than the men he so often played. On November 10, 2006, Palance died of natural causes at his daughter Holly's home in Montecito, California, at the age of 87. He was cremated, his ashes kept by the family, with a memorial held at St. Michael's Ukrainian Catholic Church in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, back in the coal country where his life began. Lawrence Murphy ruled Lincoln County through fear. Jack Palance spent his last act proving how badly the world had misread the man beneath the menace. Number 4. In 1987, he was the most exciting new face in America, and within a few years, Hollywood seemed to lose track of what to do with him. Lou Diamond Phillips had exploded as Richie Valens in La Bamba and as a troubled student in Stand and Deliver, then rode straight into Young Guns as Chavez y Chavez, the knife-quiet tracker who becomes the moral center of Billy's gang. Born in the Philippines to a Navy father, Phillips carried a mixed heritage that the studios of that era struggled to cast, and the leading man career so many predicted narrowed instead into steady, respected character work. His first marriage to Julie Cypher began in 1986 and ended in 1990. A second marriage to Kelly Phillips lasted from 1994 to 2007 and brought him 3 daughters, Grace, Isabella, and Lily. Since 2007, he has been married to Yvonne Boismier, with whom he has a 4th daughter, Indigo. There were rough patches he faced head-on, including a 2017 drunk driving arrest that he addressed openly rather than deflect. Rather than fade, Phillips kept reinventing himself across 4 decades, earning a Tony nomination for The King and I on Broadway, holding down the Western series Longmire, and later starring in Prodigal Son. He also stepped behind the camera to direct. At 63, he is among the very few from this cast saddling up again for a 3rd Young Guns film. Chavez y Chavez was the survivor who kept writing after the others had fallen. Lou Diamond Phillips built exactly that kind of career, still standing long after the moment that was supposed to define him. Number 5. His unraveling played out in real time in 2011, louder and more public than almost any collapse in television history. Charlie Sheen, brother of Emilio Estevez, and the second Sheen in this cast, was the highest-paid actor on television when he was fired from 2.5 Men in the middle of that storm. In Young Guns, he played Dick Brewer, the level-headed foreman who tries to keep the regulators inside the law. Long before the chaos, he had been a serious young actor, carrying Platoon and Wall Street for Oliver Stone and headlining the comedy Major League. Off-screen, his life ran the other direction for years, through 3 marriages and stretches of time he has openly called wasted. He wed Donna Peel in 1995, then the actress Denise Richards from 2002 to 2006, who is the mother of his daughters Sam and Lola, and then Brooke Mueller from 2008 to 2011, the mother of his twin sons Bob and Max. A 5th child, his daughter Cassandra, came from an earlier relationship. What almost no one predicted was the quiet that followed all that noise. Sheen stopped drinking in 2017, has stayed sober ever since, and in 2025 published a candid memoir and sat for a 2-part documentary that looked back without excuses. He had already found a little steadier ground on the sitcom Anger Management before stepping away from the grind. He rebuilt slowly, privately, and entirely on his own terms. At 60, he lives a deliberately small life a short drive from the studios where he once made headlines every single night. Dick Brewer was the steady hand who kept the others from going too far. Charlie Sheen had to ride all the way to the edge himself before he finally found that same footing. Charlie Sheen went from the loudest man on television to one of the quietest, and some of you followed every stage of it. Tell me in the comments which member of this gang surprised you most. Number 6. When the great love of his youth left him at the end of the 1960s, he walked away from stardom and spent years drifting through India, searching for something films had never given him. Terence Stamp had been half of the most photographed couple in Britain alongside the model Jean Shrimpton, and when she was gone, the wound reshaped the rest of his life. In Young Guns, he was John Tunstall, the courtly English rancher whose murder lights the fuse for everything that follows. Born in London's working-class East End in 1938, he had risen fast, earning an Academy Award nomination for his very first American film, Billy Budd, in 1962, and a Cannes Acting Prize soon after for The Collector. A generation later, he found a fresh audience as the cold General Zod in the first 2 Superman films, then reinvented himself yet again with a celebrated, against-type role in the Australian road film The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and gave one of his finest performances as an aging ex-convict in The Limey. He married only once, at the age of 64, wedding Elizabeth O'Rourke in 2002, and the marriage ended in divorce 6 years later. On August 17, 2025, Stamp died at the age of 87 in a care home in Bickley, southeast London, with his family choosing not to disclose a specific cause. His burial arrangements were kept private, a fitting silence for a man who had spent a lifetime guarding his inner world. John Tunstall was the gentleman whose death set younger men aflame. Terence Stamp outlived nearly everyone in that story, holding on until the late summer of last year. Number 7. Long before he was the man every romantic comedy heroine leaves at the altar or comes running back to, he was the filthiest member of this outlaw gang. Dermot Mulroney played Dirty Steve Stevens, the loud, unwashed, unpredictable joker of the Regulators. A trained classical cellist who still records on film scores, Mulroney built one of the steadiest careers of anyone here, anchoring My Best Friend's Wedding opposite Julia Roberts, and working without a pause across 4 decades. His marriage to the actress Catherine Keener began in 1990 and gave the two of them a son, Clyde, born in 1999 before the marriage ended. A second marriage to the Italian-born producer Theresa Cesaroni in 2008 brought him 2 daughters, Mabel and Sally, and reached its own quiet end when he filed for divorce in the summer of 2025. Rather than lean forever on his early heartthrob image, Mulroney kept remaking himself, playing villains, weary fathers, and character parts in everything from the crime drama Zodiac to the horror hit Scream. He found a new generation of fans as a smooth love interest on the sitcom New Girl and drew fresh acclaim in the ensemble of August Osage County. Through all of it, he stayed close to his 3 children. At 62, he works as constantly as ever, one of the busiest actors of his generation. Dirty Steve was the gang's loose cannon, the one nobody could ever quite predict. Dermot Mulroney became his exact opposite in real life, the dependable professional who simply never stopped showing up. Number 8. For nearly 30 years, he was the actor whose face you knew without ever quite catching his name. Terry O'Quinn had been working steadily since the late 1970s when, at 52, a role on the island drama Lost turned him into a full-fledged star and won him an Emmy. In Young Guns, he played Alexander McSween, the idealistic lawyer who tries to fight Murphy's empire with paperwork instead of pistols. Born Terrence Quinn in small-town Michigan, he had spent decades as a reliable presence in films like Heaven's Gate, Silver Bullet, and Tombstone, and he finally got to carry a picture as the title character in the chilling thriller The Stepfather. He even played Howard Hughes in The Rocketeer. Earlier still, he had anchored the eerie drama Millennium through the late 1990s, and Lost went on to bring him a second Emmy nomination in 2010. Steadiness marked his private life as well. He married Laurie O'Quinn in 1979, and the two raised 2 sons across a marriage that lasted more than 30 years before ending in 2010. After Lost, he kept working, joining Hawaii 5-0 and turning up in the acclaimed series Patrick Melrose, then largely stepped back to enjoy a quieter existence. At 72, he keeps a low public profile, content far from the spotlight that had found him so late. Alexander McSween believed the slow, lawful path could still win the day. Terry O'Quinn is living proof that patience, in a business obsessed with youth, sometimes pays off at the very last. If you are enjoying finding out where these gunfighters ended up, take a moment to subscribe, because this channel tracks down the full cast of the films and shows you grew up on. Number 9. The final year of his life carried more grief than any person should ever have to hold. Brian Keith was fighting lung cancer and emphysema, wrestling with money troubles, and mourning his daughter Daisy, who had died only 10 weeks earlier when he died at his Malibu home on June 24, 1997, at the age of 75. In Young Guns, he appeared as Buckshot Roberts, the grizzled bounty hunter who cuts down several of the Regulators in one of the film's fiercest fights. Long before Hollywood, Keith had served as a Marine machine gunner in the Pacific during the Second World War, and he carried that weathered authority into everything he did. A whole generation knew him best as the gruff bachelor Uncle Bill on the 1960s series Family Affair, and as the exasperated father squaring off with Haley Mills in the original Parent Trap. Older audiences remembered his commanding turn as a desert chieftain, opposite Sean Connery in The Wind and the Lion. Decades of steady television work had also made him the star of the acclaimed Western series The Westerner, and much later, the 1980s crime show Hardcastle and McCormick. His easy warmth on screen made the sorrow of his final chapter cut all the deeper for the people who had grown up watching him. Keith was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, the small, star-filled cemetery tucked behind a movie theater on Wilshire Boulevard. Buckshot Roberts was the old hand who refused to go down easy. Brian Keith gave audiences decades of comfort while quietly carrying a private weight almost none of them ever saw. Number 10. He turned up in 3 of the most enduring films of the 1980s and somehow never became a name that anyone could quite place. Casey Siemaszko was a bully in Back to the Future, a switchblade-carrying tough in Stand By Me, and here he played Charlie Boder, the loyal, anxious regulator who idolizes Billy. Born in Chicago to a Polish father and a British mother, he trained at the Goodman School of Drama and came of age on screen just as that decade was minting its young stars, though the spotlight always seemed to settle on the men standing beside him. He carried the cult thriller 3 O'Clock High as its bullied hero, and later played the brutish Curly in the 1992 film of Mice and Men, showing a range the marquee rarely gave him room to use. Instead of stardom, he built a long life as a working character actor, moving between film, television, and the Chicago stage that first shaped him, the kind of performer directors trust to make any scene feel true. His personal life he has kept almost entirely private, with little placed on the public record. His sister Nina Siemaszko followed him into acting and became a familiar face in her own right. At 64, he still works, decades after sharing the frame with nearly every young star this era produced. Charlie Boder wanted only to matter to the men he rode beside. Casey Siemaszko settled into being the actor other actors respected, even when audiences never learned his name. Number 11. He spent his entire career being measured against the most famous cowboy who ever lived, because that cowboy happened to be his father. Patrick Wayne, the second son of John Wayne, appeared here as Pat Garrett, the lawman who, in the sequel, becomes the very man who hunts Billy the Kid to his end. Wayne made more than 40 films, 9 of them alongside his father, from The Alamo to The Green Berets, and for a stretch in the 1970s, he headlined adventures like Sinbad and The Eye of the Tiger. He even hosted the game show Tic-Tac-Doe for a time. Younger fans had watched him grow up on screen alongside his father in pictures like McClintock and The Searchers. Living inside that enormous shadow was its own quiet burden, and he slowly made peace with stepping out of it. When his father died of stomach cancer in 1979, the loss redirected the whole course of Patrick's life. He walked away from acting altogether, and since 2003 has served as chairman of the John Wayne Cancer Institute, calling that work the most rewarding of anything he has done. He married and raised his family largely outside the public eye, protecting the ordinary life his famous name made so hard to keep. At 86, he remains devoted to the cause that grew directly out of his father's death. Pat Garrett was the man fated to end Billy the Kid. Patrick Wayne turned away from the legend he was born into and found his real purpose in a research hospital, not a saddle. Number 12. She was crossing a Manhattan street with the walk signal in her favor, only steps from the school that had trained her, when an electric scooter struck her down and never stopped. Lisa Baines would not recover. In Young Guns, she had a small, sharp turn as Mallory, and across a long career she gathered more than 80 film and television roles, from Cocktail to Gone Girl, where she played the mother of a missing woman. Trained at Juilliard from her teenage years, Baines was a serious stage actress first, reaching Broadway in Tom Stoppard's Arcadia and a revival of Noel Coward's Present Laughter, and later appearing in series like 6 Feet Under and Desperate Housewives. She had made her film debut in The Hotel New Hampshire in 1984, and turned up over the years in everything from Son of the Morning Star to the thriller A Cure for Wellness. On June 4, 2021, she was in New York visiting friends, walking near Juilliard along Amsterdam Avenue when the scooter hit her and the rider fled the scene. She suffered a traumatic brain injury and died 10 days later at Mount Sinai Morningside Hospital on June 14th at the age of 65. She had married in 2017, and the spouse she left behind survived her. Her family chose to keep her final resting place private, closing a very public life with one last quiet act of privacy. Mallory drifted through this story in only a few short scenes. Lisa Baines spent 40 years earning standing ovations, only to be taken by a stranger on a sidewalk in the one city she called home. Brian Keith lies in California soil, Jack Palance in ashes his family keeps. Terence Stamp and Lisa Baines where no map will show, while the rest ride toward New Mexico again.